Imagine a quiet morning in December when suddenly, the skies over Pearl Harbor become dark with enemy aircraft. This serene Sunday morning in 1941 was about to become a day of infamy, a day that would change the course of history forever. Pearl Harbor, a lagoon harbor on the island of Oahu, Hawaii, was the home of the United States Pacific Fleet. It was seen as an impregnable fortress, a safe haven for the mighty ships of the American Navy. But that illusion of safety was shattered on the morning of December 7th, when hundreds of Japanese planes descended from the skies. Without a formal declaration of war, the Japanese forces launched a surprise attack, catching the United States completely off guard. The onslaught was relentless, wave after wave of aircraft, each armed with torpedoes and bombs. The devastation was immense: battleships sunk, aircraft destroyed, and over 2,400 American lives lost. The surprise attack on Pearl Harbor was a strategic move by the Japanese forces, aimed at crippling the United States Pacific Fleet. It was a gamble, a daring ploy that Japan hoped would buy them enough time to secure their empire in the Pacific before the United States could retaliate. But the attack had an unintended consequence. It galvanized a nation, turning the tide of public opinion. The United States, which had been hesitant to enter the war, was now ready to fight. The day after the attack, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed the nation, declaring December 7th as a date which will live in infamy. And Congress passed the declaration of war against Japan. In the aftermath of Pearl Harbor, the United States mobilized for war. Factories were repurposed to produce weapons, men and women enlisted in the armed forces, and the nation rallied around a common cause. It was a turning point in World War II, a moment that redefined the conflict. The world was at war, and the United States, once a spectator, was now on the battlefield. As nations chose sides, the world divided into the Allies and the Axis. The Allies, a group of nations bound by the desire to halt the Axis powers' aggressive expansion, were led by powerhouses like the United States, the United Kingdom, and the Soviet Union. They stood in opposition to the Axis, a coalition primarily composed of Germany, Italy, and Japan. Nations determined to reshape the world in their image. Each side had leaders who were characters in their own right. For the Allies, figures like Franklin Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin stood tall. On the opposite side, Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, and Emperor Hirohito held the reins. These were the men who would steer their nations through the storm of war, their decisions shaping the course of history. They were the architects of strategies, the givers of orders, the carriers of their nation's hopes and fears. The stage was set, the players in position, and the world braced itself for a conflict unlike any other. While the Axis powers seemed unstoppable initially, the tide of war was about to turn. The world was about to witness pivotal moments in history, marked by bloodshed and strategic brilliance that would change the course of the Second World War. In the icy winds of Stalingrad, the Red Army held their ground against the German onslaught. It was a brutal, unrelenting battle, fought in the bitter cold of the Russian winter. This was a war of attrition, a grinding down of the enemy, that would ultimately lead to one of the most significant defeats of the German army. The Battle of Stalingrad, a turning point in the war, was a testament to the resilience and determination of the Soviet Union, showcasing their ability to resist and retaliate against the Axis powers. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the Allies were planning one of the most audacious amphibious invasions in history, the Normandy invasion, or D-Day. This was a daring operation, involving over 100,000 troops from the United States, Great Britain, and Canada. They landed on the beaches of Normandy, under heavy gunfire and against formidable German defenses. Their courage and determination led to a successful invasion, opening up a Western front and marking the beginning of the end for Hitler's Fortress Europe. Then, in the vast expanse of the Pacific, the United States Navy clashed with the Imperial Japanese Navy in the Battle of Midway. It was a decisive victory for the Allies, turning the tide in the Pacific War. The Japanese fleet suffered devastating losses from which they never fully recovered. This battle marked a significant shift in the momentum of the war, providing a much-needed morale boost for the Allies, and a harsh blow to the Japanese. These turning points in the war, these moments of courage and strategic brilliance, marked the beginning of the end for the Axis powers. The once invincible Axis found themselves retreating, but the war was far from over. In the shadows of the war, a horrific genocide was unfolding. A brutal plan, meticulously designed and executed by the Nazi regime, was set in motion. This was the Holocaust, a state-sponsored, systematic persecution and annihilation of 6 million Jews. The Holocaust was not an accident in history, it happened because individuals, organizations and governments made choices that not only legalized discrimination but also allowed prejudice, hatred, and ultimately mass murder to occur. The Nazis, under the tyrannical rule of Adolf Hitler, propagated a doctrine of racial hygiene that sought to eliminate those they deemed inferior or unfit. Jews, being the primary targets, were stripped of their rights, their properties, their dignity, and finally, their lives. They were herded like cattle into ghettos, deprived of basic human necessities, and subjected to unspeakable atrocities. The ghettos were merely a prelude to the final act of the Holocaust, the concentration camps. In these camps, men, women, and children were systematically exterminated in gas chambers, their bodies burned in crematoriums, their ashes scattered to the winds. Those who managed to avoid immediate death were subjected to forced labor, medical experiments, and hunger. The scale of human suffering was unimaginable. The Holocaust was not solely about the extermination of Jews, though they were the primary victims. Others too fell prey to the Nazis' genocidal policy. Romani people, the disabled, Polish and Soviet civilians, political dissenters, LGBTQ+ individuals, Jehovah's Witnesses and others, were all victims of this horrific period in human history. The world was left in shock and horror as the extent of the Holocaust came to light. The sheer scale of the atrocity, the calculated brutality, and the cold indifference that allowed it to occur left an indelible scar on humanity's conscience. The Holocaust stands as a stark reminder of the depths to which human evil can descend, but also as a beacon, a call to action, that such horrors must never be allowed to happen again. As the Allies pushed forward, the end of the war was in sight. The year was 1945 and the world held its breath. The final stages of the war were unfolding rapidly, and they were nothing short of cataclysmic. The Allied forces, a coalition of nations committed to restoring peace, were making significant headway across multiple fronts. On the European front, Germany was besieged. The once formidable Nazi regime was now crumbling under the relentless pressure of the Allies. The fall of Berlin in May marked the end of Hitler's reign and the capitulation of Germany. Yet, the war was far from over. The Pacific theater still raged on, with Japan refusing to surrender. The Allies needed a decisive victory to end this global conflict once and for all. And so, they turned to a new, terrifying weapon: the atomic bomb. In August, 2 atomic bombs were dropped on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The devastation was unimaginable. The cities were reduced to ruins and countless lives were lost in an instant. The power of these weapons was a grim testament to the destructive capabilities of mankind. The world watched in horror as the reality of nuclear warfare was laid bare. The atomic bombings marked a turning point not just in the war, but in human history. The world had entered the nuclear age, and it was a sobering realization. The bombings brought about the desired effect. Japan, faced with the overwhelming destructive power of the atomic bomb, finally surrendered. On August 15, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender to the Allies, bringing the war in the Pacific to a close. On September 2, 1945, World War II officially ended, leaving a world forever changed. The echoes of this global conflict continue to reverberate through our history, shaping the world we live in today. The end of the war marked a new beginning, one where the lessons of this tragic chapter would hopefully guide us towards a future of peace. World War II was a cataclysmic event that shaped the 20th century. A sudden invasion set the world ablaze, drawing nations into a conflict of unprecedented scale and brutality. The sides took shape, with the Allies and the Axis powers locked in a deadly dance. The tide of war ebbed and flowed, with turning points that altered the course of history. It was a time of immense suffering, most horrifically exemplified by the Holocaust, a dark chapter that forever stands as a testament to man's inhumanity. The war eventually ground to a halt, but not before it had left an indelible mark on the world. It was an event that tested the limits of human endurance and resilience, a conflict that brought out both the worst and the best in us. World War II was not just a war, it was a lesson for humanity, a reminder of the depths to which we can fall and the heights to which we can rise.